Okay, so we got a Panzer user who has had some questions about breaking in. They're running a bunch of different kinds of loads, using the heavy cylinder and the light cylinder. And I'm at this point, I'm quite qualified to discuss the issues with the breaking in of the gun. So what I want to do is disassemble the gun and talk about all of this. To talk about just the gun and the all the things that I would recommend for people who have just received the gun and who just started shooting it. Okay, first thing I would recommend is don't run the heavy cylinder. Just don't do it. If you look at the math that Panzer provides, it's 1,400 feet per second and 1.5 ounces of shot weight. And that is a heavy load. Okay, that's like a 3-inch Magnum load, and a lot of us are not going to be running those loads. Probably shouldn't be running those loads during break-in anyway. They're expensive loads. They're hard to find on the shelf. So I would recommend just start out with a light cylinder and run loads between 1,300 and 1,500 feet per second, like 1 to 1.5 ounces. Most of your game loads are going to be good for that. Most game loads are going to be from like 1,280 to like 1,400 or something. So you're not going to be able to run light loads like below, 1,250, 1,280 when you first get the gun on the light cylinder. It's just not going to be broken in enough. I couldn't run light loads on the gun until 400 rounds. So like if you want to run like 1150, 1100, 1250 loads on this gun, that you're probably going to have like a whole bunch of like extraction issues and functioning issues with the gun because it's just not broken in. The recoil spring, the contact points on the rail and the lifter and the trigger, none of those things are worn in yet. And they do wear in. So and I'll show you that in the video here. So just do yourself a favor, do me a favor, run like 1,300 feet per second loads on the light cylinder for like 400 rounds. I could run 1,280, 1,290, 1,300, 1,320, 1,350, 1,400. All those loads usually work really well to start out on a light cylinder. If you're trying to run a 1,250, a 1,200, an 1145, an 1,100, you're probably going to have problems. Okay. All right. So that's the first place to start, man. If you're trying to run stuff on the heavy cylinder, unless you're running like super specialized heavy freaking loads, it's probably not going to function very well. This gun is a little bit dirty because it's got 50 rounds from last night through it. Okay. And we're definitely going to have to talk about the trigger pack here. So let's take that out. Okay. First thing, if you want to help break in your gun, you can cycle the action, release the bolt, pull the bolt, release the bolt. Do that several hundred times. I mean, it's a pain in the butt, but that is going to help break in the spring, okay? Springs only break in by cycling forwards and backwards. They're not going to break in by keeping it compressed. Okay, that's not how you break in a spring. A spring has got to move both forwards and backwards. So cycling the action, which means charging the bolt back, hitting the bolt release, charging the bolt back and hitting the bolt release, doing that like 200 times, that's going to help. The other thing is you can sand down the charging handle, because this is rough. So I sanded mine down and smoothed it out real good, because you'll find that this will wear your hand out real quick. You could just wear a glove when charging this, okay? All right, let's see. The next thing is you can use this spring collar to cycle this spring. You just put it on here like this and just cycle that spring, okay? That's exactly what is going to help break in a spring. Compressed, release, compress, release, compress, release. You can do this like 500 times if you want, okay? But just doing that is not going to help break in these components here. It's not going to help wear in the rail either, okay? So I would suggest, if you want to truly break in the gun without having to shoot it, load rounds in the magazine and cycle those rounds out. Load them in the magazine, cycle them out. Load them in the magazine, cycle them out by pulling the charging handle, okay? That will cause the entire gun to function, because the round will be going into the breech, it'll be going into the chamber, the extractor will be working, all the springs, the extractor spring, the springs on the trigger pack, all those things, the recoil spring and the magazine spring will be getting exercised. So that's how I would cycle it. Okay, what else? There was a question about polishing the chamber on the barrel because there was some extraction issues. Okay, I inspected my chamber and it's shiny. Like, I don't know if you can see it in there, but it's just shiny. They do a pretty good job of polishing this, and all of this is nickel plated too. I did put a swab in here with some fine grit honing compound and polished it, but I really don't think that's necessary. What you can do is you can feel in there, how darn smooth it is. It's pretty darn smooth. So the other thing is you can look in there and look at the shine on the chamber, okay? It's shiny. So they do a pretty good job on this. If you want to polish this, it's probably not going to hurt anything, but if you take a tissue and a 20 gauge swab, okay, not a 12 gauge swab, but a 20 gauge swab, put tissue on a 20 gauge swab and put it in there and spin it around and pull it out. If that tissue is not torn up or anything, chances are that this is pretty smooth, okay? Let me see, what else? Here we go, trigger pack. Okay, there are surfaces on this trigger pack that get worn in, all right? There are key surfaces that get worn in here, all right? In here, all along this area, up here, and behind here, okay? All of this gets worn in. It gets worn in because the rail is coming back and forth here, and it's impacting these parts, okay? You can see how these parts fit together here, all right? So this rail slides on here and impacts these parts. So the lifter mechanism gets worn in against this area of the rail. So once again, cycling your gun, cycling rounds through your gun, even if you use dummy rounds, I just use normal rounds. Just keep it pointed in a good direction, keep your finger off the trigger. But cycling rounds through the gun is going to help these areas get worn in. You can see, okay, there's wear here, there's wear here, there's wear on this point here, there's wear up here. All these areas get worn in because this thing is being constantly pushed back, okay? And on the slide, on the rail or the slide, this area here gets worn in. This is constantly impacting the lifter mechanism. This gets worn in. This running area here gets worn in. And this area here, which is what loads the trigger, up here and up here, this loads the trigger. All these areas get worn in. So you keep the rear end of this and these running areas well oiled. You could even use a light grease, like a shotgun grease would be fine. I've been using 5W30. Okay? But this is, I think, part of, you know, if somebody's having lifter errors, part of those lifter errors are related to the fact that these areas are still getting worn in. All right, I keep all of this lubed. Every single pivot pin on here, I keep lubed. I lubed this head here on the spring. Okay, I keep that entire surface lubed. It's pretty smooth. I keep it lubed. I keep this pin lubed. I keep this area down in here lubed. I keep these areas lubed. I just drop lube down in there. 5W30 is what I use. I lube this. I lube down in here. Okay. This pin, okay, goes all the way across here. So I put a little bit of lube on there too. I put lube down in this channel where this spring runs. Okay. I put a little bit of lube down in there too to make sure that's running properly. Haven't had to modify any of this. I just keep it well lubed. The hammer is a little bit worn in here. You can see where it's been worn down a little bit by the rail. So I put lube on here too. I also lube this area here because this area engages with the bolt release shell catch device. Okay. So when this is inside here, this little tab engages with the wall of the shell catch. So I lube all that. And, you know, this, by cycling the gun, you're going to help break this in. Cycle it like a couple hundred times, 200-300 times. I didn't get the gun broken in enough to run 1,100 feet per second loads until 400 rounds. So maybe you need to cycle it 400 times. Okay, another thing that's really important here is this mechanism in here. I don't know if you can see it very well. Yeah, see, that's a problem with this impromptu filming. This mechanism in here, all right, I lube the entire wall of this. I keep this oily and lubed. I lube the front of the shell catch up here too. All right. I just take lube, put lube on my finger, and I just rub this whole thing down. Okay. So the trigger mechanism, okay, when you put this in, all right, this lever here, okay, runs up against the side of this. So it's really important to make sure that this surface is lubed and this surface here is lubed. Okay, everything is pretty well, you know, polished down and stuff from the factory, but it's still going to break in somewhat. So you just keep all that stuff lubed and cycle your gun as much as possible. What else? Really important. The speed at which the shells come out of the magazine is critical. If the lifter is being activated by the slide, okay, the slide comes back, activates the lifter. If the lifter is being pulled up by the slide before these shells can get out of the magazine, okay, that's going to cause lifter impacts. So one of the things I do is I keep the tube clean every shooting. And every time I shoot, when I clean this, there's gunk in here. I get freaking powder debris and stuff in here because there's freaking gas is blowing all over inside this gun. So I keep the tube clean, and I lube the spring, and I lube the follower every single time. See, it's freaking oily right now, okay? That's really important. Because if your magazine's not working right, you're going to have feeding issues. There's going to be all sorts of problems. The shells are going to come out here. The timing of the shells coming out of here is not going to match the timing of the lifter lifting up to feed the next shell. Okay, you want to get that shell out of here and onto the lifter before the lifter rises up. Okay, so the way that looks is the lifter is basically the rail is gonna come backwards. It's gonna engage the lifter like that. Okay, the shell catch, all right, is gonna release a shell like this. It's going to jump onto the lifter. The lifter's going to lift the shell up, and then it's going to go into the chamber. Okay? So keeping your magazine clean and functioning smooth is really important. If you want to polish the inside of your mag tube, that's fine. But you'll find that if you feel in here, it's nice and polished. From everything I can tell, Panzer's done a good job of polishing their chamber and their mag tube. Okay? The barrel, okay, I lube the barrel too, okay, because the bolt's moving in and out here. So I lube this area. This is where the lifter or the locking block locks into the top of the barrel, okay, right here. So I keep this lubed because I don't want it to wear out. I also keep this entire surface wiped down with oil. See, there's oil on there right now. I also clean the chamber and the barrel with the bronze brush. And when I'm done cleaning it, I swab it, and then I run a swab of oil through here. I make sure it's well oiled. Basically, every single moving part on the gun, I make sure is well oiled. It's a semi-automatic shotgun, and it's Turkish parts. So especially during the break-in period, you just need to make sure everything's clean and well oiled. Okay, the bolt, I pretty much lube. I wipe oil down the entire outside of the bolt. Okay, I lube up in here. I lube this pin. I lube the extractor spring area. Okay, and I was having a lot of extraction issues because I was having an issue with my extractor pin, and eventually I lost that pin. So I installed a screw instead, which there's a video on. Ever since I've installed this new extractor pivot pin, I haven't had any failures to eject. Okay, so if you're having like a whole bunch of consistent failures to eject, you should check this and see if it's stable, if it moves very consistently, or if it's wobbling around, or maybe even your pin is missing. Okay, I also will lube the firing pin. Okay, I haven't needed to remove this pin. I don't think you will need to remove it. It's kind of permanently installed here. This is the firing pin retention pin. But I'll put lube back here on this part of the bolt. I'll drop a little lube in up here. Okay, I keep the bolt face lube too. This entire thing is oily. And that's about it. Okay, if you run like 1,300 feet per second to 1,500 feet per second shells, whether it's game load or buckshot or slugs in this gun for the first 300-400 rounds, that's gonna, with the light piston. Okay, and the light piston is the one with the steel ring that rotates. Okay, you run this gun with the light piston with 13 to 1,400, 1,500 feet per second rounds. That's going to be very wise for the break-in, because if you're matching the wrong rounds with the wrong piston, you're going to have issues not related to the gun. It's going to be related to the forces provided by the gas system. Okay, so there may be people that they're shooting their shotgun, it's not working right, la-di-da-di-da. Well, yeah, if you're running lighter loads with a heavier piston, you're going to see all sorts of problems. That heavy piston, you're going to be very unlikely, unless you're running 3-inch Magnum loads, man, like 1.5 ounce, 16, 17, 1,800 feet per second type loads. You might not even need that heavy piston. I used the heavy piston once when I first got the gun with slugs, 1,600 feet per second slugs, but they were 1 ounce slugs. I found it was really hard to find shells on the shelf that would match with what the heavy piston was requiring. So just put the heavy piston away, man. Run the light piston, okay? And run, game loads, buckshot, and slugs, okay? Chances are pretty good that none of your target loads are going to run in this gun initially, because it's just, most target loads are like down around like 1,100, 1,200 feet per second. And they're like 1 ounce or 1/8 ounce. So, if you're trying to run target loads initially when you get the gun, you're going to probably see problems, okay? One last thing here. The piston, okay, moves on here like this, okay? All right, so I keep this clean and oiled inside here. All right, I also keep this clean and oiled inside the piston, and I keep it clean and oiled outside the piston. Okay, I also highly recommend that you keep inside the gas chamber here clean and oiled. You just run some oil in there, let it sit, use some ATF, use some solvent of some sort, whatever you want, but just run it in here and then wipe it out and then re-oil it. Every time you clean something, re-oil it when you're done, okay? The other thing is, this is aftermarket mag spring. This is the Wolf 16097 Benelli 7-round extra power magazine spring. Okay, and it has compressed quite a lot since I got it, but it's still working. It was functioning 1100 feet per second loads last night. I shot 50 Remington target loads last night with it, and it's working just fine. But if you're finding that you're having a lot of lifter impacts here, you might need to upgrade your spring to the Wolf spring. There's a video on that, okay? And you know, if you're when you trim down the 7-shot spring, okay, to fit properly in your magazine, less coils is better than more. Trimming off less coils is better than more, because this has compressed like 20 to 30% since I've installed it. Okay, so over the last 300-400 rounds, this is actually broken in. When the spring breaks in, the coils get closer together. Okay, so that's about it. That's my quick and dirty discussion on how to break in the gun, how to lube it, how to oil it. I also lube in here. I lube the rails. I lube the sidewalls. Okay, the shell is coming out into the mechanism here. Okay, and on occasion I find the shell will get bound up on the sidewalls. So what I do is I just spread a little bit of oil on the sidewalls here, and I oil the rail running slots here too. And that's about it. It's kind of a high maintenance gun during break-in, and it does require break-in. Okay, all the surfaces in the gun get worn in, all the springs get worn in, everything gets worn in, and everything needs to be lubed. So I still will spend like a half an hour or so cleaning all this stuff every time I'm going to use the gun. But I found now, after 750 rounds, it was actually broken in around 400 rounds. Okay, I had some issues after 400 rounds, but it was related to the fact that my extractor pin was loose, and I eventually lost it. I didn't notice that. So keep an eye on this stuff. Keep an eye on your extractor pin and your firing pin, retention pin. And keep an eye on your lifting block, your locking block here too. Okay, this surface takes a lot of wear during the break-in, and what happens is it gets hammered down enough that it hardens up. Okay, but initially what you're going to see is that this surface in here, right in here, this 90-degree flush surface is going to get hammered in a little bit during break-in, but it hardens up. All of that hammering hardens this metal up, and it seems to be okay now. So right on. This is the Owl signing off. Send me messages if you think I've missed anything or you have questions. Just send me messages on this video, and I'll do my best to answer it. Cool. Peace out.